one. Yes. All right. Hello. We should be going live any second now. Let me refresh my LinkedIn to see if it is showing up.
I'm showing that you're live. Ooh.
Oh, yay. Awesome. All right, cool. Gary is live. Hello, everyone. If you are starting to see this, we are live. I'm live with my good buddy, Kathy. Let me just get my stuff dialed in on this end. All right, cool.
There's so many little steps. There's so many little steps to like get this thing to full production.
It is. This is a beta. So if you were watching live, just bear with us as we get the kinks out. LinkedIn is still in beta, but I'm with my good friend Kathy, Klotz-Guest. We're going to be talking about psychological safety at work. Yes. A topic that is very much needed, and going to give a moment for a few more people to hop on. So if you are hopping on, let us know if you can hear us, because that would just be awkward for me to be like this, and no one can hear what I'm saying.
We could totally mess with people and be like, what?
I know, right? We could just. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
We're being playful.
That's how we get down. So yes,
that's how we do it.
If you're joining in, whether it's live or the replay, hit some of those reactions, the thumbs up, the claps, or the loves, just so we know that you are there. But we're going to be talking about psychological safety. So Kathy, since this is our first time going live on LinkedIn together, I know most of the people that we're in the same circles know who you are, but if there's someone who does not know who you are, how about you just give us a quick introduction?
Yeah. So Gary and I we're brother and sister in play and improv. We're both improvisers, teach and all that stuff. And it's a lot of the work that I do is really bringing improv and comedy concepts into the workplace. And it's not necessarily about making people funnier, because people get freaked out. They get a little worried. It's really about unleashing more creativity and getting along better and collaborating better. All the good stuff that play does. I know you and all of our colleagues, talk a lot about, and that's really the focus. I want people to rock. I want work to suck less. I want, if you're going to be there 8 to 10 hours a day, it shouldn't hurt. It should not hurt.
Right.
And that's really it. And to that end, segue into the topic, really is, Gary and I have talked on before everybody about like psychological safety and this concept of what brings out the best in people. And that's really having a safe environment to express themselves and take risks and all that good stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to be live. We go way back. What was our first platform that we were on that we started going live together?
We were on Blab.
Yes, Blab.
We were blabbers.
Yes. Does anyone remember Blab?
Yes. What? If you remember Blab, we were blabbers. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes, that goes way back. But let me see. All right, cool. There's 4 people on. Hello. If you could just comment in and let us know. We're talking about psychological safety. So Kathy, on the topic, I know this is just a hot topic.
Yeah.
Why, in your opinion, should leaders, business owners, managers, why should they care about creating psychological safety?
Yeah, I think people would probably be stunned, or maybe not. I think first of all, put your employee hat on. Just put your employee hat on for a while. You know what it's like to be in a meeting or to be creating something, and people go, well, "That won't work," or to not know. People say, "Be innovative." Your boss goes, "Go be innovative," and you're like, "What does that mean? What? Okay, but okay." And then you hear about it when you fail. So that's your employee hat. Now put on your management hat, and there's pressure above to like go create, and you don't know what to tell your own employees how much degrees of freedom they have, and everybody wants more. Everybody wants employees to do these, miraculous things. Everybody wants them to turn water into wine, like Jesus. Like everyone wants,
Yes.
And yet we're not getting the best out of our employees. And I think now that we know this, and there's studies, and Gary and I talk a lot about like Google studies and all these different studies that are now surfacing where we actually have data, we actually have research that shows just how important psychological safety is to employees giving their best. It's an issue that can't be ignored. And especially when, Gary and folks here watching this know, it's like, if you, the job market in certain markets is so hot. If you cannot treat talent right, they're going to leave. If you're not creating psychological safety, you know what? Bye-bye. They're going to go find a place that will. And it's too important a topic, I think, and I don't think you can ignore it anymore. You can't.
100% agree. And if you are new to the topic, we'll make sure to post the link in the comments. Kathy mentioned Project Aristotle. It's the research that Google did. It was their quest to find what makes the perfect team. And it was inconclusive on understanding, degrees and level of experience and technical ability. That was inconclusive on creating a rock star team, because there were teams that crushed it and they had super smart people, and there were teams that bombed. And the one thing that they found that was common amongst all environments where they had killer performance was psychological safety. And, that's basically the people of that team, they feel confident that they can be themselves. They feel like they can express their opinions without fear of ridicule. They have no problem bringing ideas out. Kathy brought up a good point about innovation. We live in this world where innovation is key. If you're not innovating, no matter what industry you're in, good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, you're right. You're so right. It's like they studied. Google studied Project Aristotle. But they looked at 180 teams over 2 years, and they found that there were 5 traits, and among them was this thing called psychological safety that showed up consistently. So they studied this stuff for 2 years, and without psychological safety, people wouldn't do anything. And Gary brings up a really important point that I just want to clarify. It wasn't just being yourself at work. It was the ability to own it if you screwed up. So the way that Google measured it was, how so many people spend so much time like, I didn't do that. That wasn't about screw up, and like blame, avoiding blame and taking responsibility. Part of what this study looked at is that in a healthy environment, in a psychologically safe environment, people aren't afraid to screw up and then own it, because it's not a blame, like finger gun blame environment. And that's such a healthy way to think about it. And so one of the things you can kind of ask yourself is that if you are in an environment, a team or a culture where people blame a lot, you are probably not in a psychologically safe environment,
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you want innovation, if you want to grow, mistakes are going to happen. And I get it. The old way of thinking is, mistakes cost, but we're not making widgets anymore. We're not producing the same thing over and over again. We're in an environment where people need to be creative, and sometimes you have to break a few eggs. However, if the people feel like they cannot own up, if they feel like, if I admit to this mistake, I'm going to get fired, no matter what the mistake is, then they're not going to play big. They're not going to take creative risks. They're going to pretty much just hide, and that's not going to lead to that safe environment.
Nothing good comes from that. But we've all been in those shame and blame environments, and it's worse than drunk grandpa at Thanksgiving dinner. Like that is like, although that's slightly entertaining, but that's I digress. It's like, it's horrible. And I think you can really honestly assess, if you're in a meeting and you're afraid to, you have an idea, but you hold back, ask yourself, do I hold back? And do you think people hold back in your environment? And if the answer is overwhelmingly yes, then clearly there are some things that might need to change, and because you're not getting people's best ideas. And that's really the saddest part about it, is you're just not. And this whole go innovate, that doesn't cut it either. Like, what does that even mean? Sure, I'll get right on that. What the hell? Because it's like we all been in environments, like we all have, where it was like, don't rock the boat, don't screw up. Bottom line's got to be X, Y, Z. I want 10% ROI. Oh, but have fun and go innovate. And you're like, what does that mean? And you never really understand how many degrees of freedom. Like, what does it mean to screw up? How much permission do I have to go try something without getting 10 layers of signatures? And I don't ever think we have these really detailed conversations. We just don't. I don't know many organizations in my research and in talking to customers and clients, and I don't find many people addressing this. And here's the interesting part, Gary, you'll appreciate this. You know, because Gary and I are both like practitioners, but we're both data nerds.
Yes.
And I say that with love.
Yes.
It's like you talk to managers, and managers are very over optimistic. They're like, we do a great job at telling everybody exactly what we want from them. Then you talk to the teams and they're like, oh, we have no idea what we're supposed to do. And there's a gap. There's a very real gap in most organizations that I think managers never address and they never close.
You bring up a really good point on that gap. And Kathy, why do you think that is? Why do you think we have that gap?
I think it's challenging. I think I think it's very challenging when you don't define what the goals are. And like, for example, in a well-run team, if you say, look, you can experiment small little tweets, or you have permission to go to our ideal clients and run ideas up the flagpole without permission. That's a very specific level of freedom. And I think part of the problem is that we're not specific because we're scared. So we don't want to put a stake in the ground and say, these are the kinds of behaviors that we endorse or that are okay. And yet we're asking a lot. So we're talking out of two sides of our mouths. We want employees to go be innovative, but we're not telling them what that actually means and how they're rewarded for it. And we're also not, the second part, Gary, is I don't think we're aligning incentives to reward the kind of behavior that we want to see. Like, okay, you want to see people experiment more? Well, how about this? How about reward them for that behavior? And that's not the way most organizations work. They reward individual behavior and not this collaborative thing, right?
You bring up an excellent point on behavior and rewarding behavior. I know that I used to work for a company where it was in our values, Six Sigma, as in near perfection. And those were the people that got rewarded, the people that made the least amount of mistakes. I totally get it that sometimes mistakes cost you. However, if you think about human behavior, we're going to focus on whatever we're essentially being rewarded, because we get dopamine and all of those great things for doing these actions. Mm-hmm. And so if mistakes are not perceived as a good thing, you're unconsciously going to stray away from that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's such a great point, because the Six Sigma one is a great example. Like, I get it. We want to have standards that are narrow, but if we're so narrow in what experimentation is, we're killing it. We're killing experimentation, because now people go, well, if I make a mistake that goes outside the Six Sigma, then I get my hand slapped. And it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Remember that bit from Office Space, where he's like, I got like, 5 bosses, and my only motivation is to not hear about it, like, from all my bosses. It's like, where's your TPS report? He's like, and the only reason I do it is so I don't have to have y'all in my face about it. Yes. And I think that's how most employees feel. Like they operate in a very narrow bandwidth, and which is really important, because when people don't feel safe, there's so much innovation they're capable of that you are not getting as a company. They are holding out on you, but it's not their fault. It's yours, the culture. It's the culture's fault. It's the people at the top's fault. And you can't blame your employees if you don't make them feel that it's okay to disagree, or it's okay to respectfully, it has some ground rules. not an all-out fight, but if you're not setting up those ground rules for how they're gonna, what defines innovation, how much exploration can I do, what are the parameters, and what are the reward systems to align that behavior and reward it, there's no, I mean, who would go out and take risks? If Six Sigma is like the marching order, then I'm not going to go out
Yes.
there, you know, and deviate from that.
Yeah.
You know.
And you bring up a good point on reward systems and values in cultures.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the book Chief Joy Officer by Richard Sheridan. And he was talking about one of the companies that he was consulting with, and they wanted to have more patents. However, the reward system only rewarded the individual. It had nothing to do with the team. And it was one of those things that once they shifted the way that they rewarded people and created an environment where it was okay to support other people and it wasn't so cutthroat. And if you think about creating patents and innovation, you need to be able to come up with ideas. So you need to have an environment where people feel okay coming up with ideas that may not be good yet.
Yeah. I love that you said good yet. And I love that. The emphasis, the pregnant pause on yet. That's exactly it. Well, maybe you have an idea bank and you go back to those ideas because they might not be good yet. But there might be a time where it fits into the company's product path. And you never know. You never know. And I love that they rewarded that collaboration. You're going to get more of what you reward. It's no secret. Years ago, here's a nerdy thing. Here's a nerdy fun fact. I have my name on a semiconductor patent. Did I come up with the idea? Hell no. But here's the thing though. I worked with a team and everybody tweaked it, and I helped them think about the simplest language to express that patent in and help to explain it. And so because I helped them, I didn't even know this had happened. The team got the patent, and then when the patent was awarded to the company, they presented it and my name was announced as being on the patent just because I helped them, which was the nicest gift anybody could give me, because you do not want me designing your semiconductors. I promise you. Well, but here, isn't that the beautiful thing that you just mentioned about the whole joy is like when you make people feel a part of a team and you're rewarding collaborative behavior, or you reward the number of team patents, or you reward team goals. And so some percent of your salary comes from the team meeting its goals, not me, but the we. You actually get the behavior you want. Shocking.
Yeah, that brings up my next question for you, Kathy, is if a team, whether it's management or, some sort of leadership, they are realizing that they need to make some shifts in order to create that environment where people can feel safe to contribute. What are some things that they can do? I know you had mentioned, look at reward systems and how, people are being rewarded for specific actions. Do you have any other recommendations?
Well, I think the recommendations definitely include those, and also my play brother from another mother, you close to your heart, as I think we have to teach people to play, right? It's like let's go back to making it safe to play. Let's make sure that people understand what's acceptable behavior and what's not. So, so it's clear, like, okay, we're going to be playful in our meetings. You have X amount of time to go pursue something as long as you get this other stuff done, but give them some play parameters and people will play. People will do it. So I think it starts with establishing those reward structures. I also think it helps having the executives at the top demonstrate the behavior, right? It's like, I know, right? Because it's like, and I laugh, and I know you're laughing because it's so funny. We all think, okay, that we all know that there are executives that are super uptight and I can't play. Play is not serious. Play is not serious. I can't do that. And yet here's the thing. When you are asking your team to engage a behavior you think is beneath you, you send the message that is not okay. the best CEOs and C-level folks and managers engage in that playful. They're part of it. The rules apply to them, and there's a leveling of the playing field. And then when they do that, they're modeling the very behavior, and it does matter. It changes the relationship, the way that people see them, and I think that's very important. And you and I have both know, Gary can tell, and I want Gary to share a story, because we've both seen where even the most like stalwart executives are like, I'm not gonna play. And then they see everybody in the team play, and then they're like, 10 minutes into it, they're like, that looks like fun. I want to play. Can I play? And it's like, yeah, you can play. And then they're so excited because they get to play. And so I think that really comes top down. And so I top down, but I also will say this: don't wait for executives to ratify behavior. Don't wait for permission. And Gary and I both subscribe to this. You have to give yourself permission too, and bring that to your team. Maybe you're not an executive, but in your team behavior, you can show up in a more playful way for other people. So you do have a little bit of control. And I'm a big believer, change the things you can. Like, you can't change the world. You can change your little local world. So start with the things that you can change, right?
Yes. Yeah. And before we give a tip on how someone can make a minor change, I'd like to make a point about, and if you've heard me talk or been in any of the workshops, you're going to get this. But for the people who don't, may have the question of like, what do you mean, play creates this sense of safety and creates this belonging in the group? Now, think about it like this. I want everyone to think about the last time you played a game, whether it was, with a group of people, whether it was a board game or maybe it was a sport. Think about how you felt in the moment. Not set aside situations where you were overly competitive and it turned into that's not play. That is something else. But where time went by like this, you felt like you were challenged just enough. And, I always think about the movie The Sandlot, the guys in The Sandlot, how they just kept the game going to keep it going. In that moment, when you're playing, a few things happen. One, your brain waves get in sync. There's been studies that show that if you were to put EKG machines on the heads of people who are playing and measure the brain waves, it gets in sync. And in those situations, your body is releasing oxytocin, which is the trust hormone. And this is another good thing. And this is for our buddy Brent, who left a comment about getting some opposing groups together and need to create that safety first. What happens is when you play, your unconscious mind takes all of your preconceived notions and set them aside for the rules of the game. So the rules of the game will supersede everything else. And then when you have that peak emotional experience, so joy and all these other things, you're going to start to see the other person that you're playing with as someone that you start to trust. So now you're creating that seed of trust, which is the foundation for what we're talking about.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think one of the biggest things that people, and Brent, thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, get opposing teams together. One of the things that it's so true when we say play. So I years ago, I facilitated a sales team thing, and I created this playful space. What did the salespeople do? It's not a surprise. Got competitive very quickly, because they come from a place where it's all about winning and losing. And if you step back and just establish the rules that, look, this is not about winning or losing. There's no right or wrong. It blows their minds, first of all. It blows their minds, because they're like, what do you mean it's not about somebody doesn't die at the end of the game? Well, that's no fun, because that's the way they're primed, right? And it's really interesting, because then when we abolish the rules, because you're right, if you tell people there are rules, the first thing they do is when you walk away, they're like, what did he say? What am I supposed to do? I want to sure I get it right. I want to be sure I don't look stupid. I got to what are the rules? Yes. Am I doing it right? And then we second guess ourselves. So one of the best things that I love to do is just say, all right, here's very generic rules. The rules don't matter. I say the rules don't matter. And their face just goes like this.
What?
Like what? And then little by little, what's so funny, and Gary, is inevitably people figure it out, and then they laugh and giggle because it doesn't matter. And then they realize It's low stakes. It's not about winning or losing. It doesn't matter. And then the giggles start to happen. And I think it's just that first moment where we have to get people out of it's a winning or losing thing, because that's not necessarily playful innovation in a company.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it goes back to, we were actually just talking about him, Dr. Stuart Brown, in his book about play.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, we're all mammals. And if you think about mammals in the wild, even they play. And you think about it, they should essentially only do what is necessary for survival. And play is on their agenda. And even though it's a vulnerable experience, when you play, yes, it puts you in a very vulnerable state, but they realize the necessity that play has on their well-being, on their ability to connect with each other. And we need to take a hint from our fellow mammals.
We do. We need to lighten up.
Lighten up.
Well, and it's interesting because you're right. I mean, if you sort of look at like play and, Stu's Dr. Stuart Brown, as Gary was saying, his book on play and play research, and he's just one of the preeminent researchers in the field of play. And there was a very much a survival. It was all about survival, to your point. And and men, as a species, it was about survival. Play is not sort of a frivolous thing. It is survival. Think about it this way. If you put a bunch of people in a room and tell them to solve a problem or the company's going to fail, right? And it's imperative that they all work together, they're going to start collaborating to solve a problem and work together. And so play was, hey, I see a sharp object on the ground. Maybe I could use that. And after 10 tries, some cave guy figured out, or cave woman, we don't discriminate, or cave person, liberated cave person discovered that, you know what? I could make a spear and this would be easier to get fish by just playing with things in the environment, right? That's how the evolution of all these things. Oh, I think that could melt this down maybe, and I could make a weapon out of this. And it was trial and error, and it was experimental, and it was play. So that fueled all this growth. And I think we forget that sometimes. So the people that want to say play doesn't matter, it matters. I mean, it's pre-verbal. Before babies talk, they're laughing and playing. It's pre-verbal. It is the first thing that human beings learn how to do.
Yes. And you bring up a good point, Kathy, about, just being curious about something and, using that sort of play muscle to think about sort of innovating. And it reminds me of a really good book by a gentleman, Stephen Johnson, and it was titled Wonderland, How Play Made the Modern World. And in that book, he brought up a good point on, we created things for leisure that ended up being something that was very functional. Like take, for example, the keyboard, like piano. It is the same thing as a keyboard that's on your laptop, but we first created it for pleasure first, and then realized the functionality that it had to be a typing device.
Yeah, for sure. I bet there's a whole history of I'm sure this book probably outlines a whole history of innovations that were just, it's like, oh, well, I can't use it for this. Or it not only does X, but it can do Y and Z as well. How cool is that, right? And that's playful adaptation. And God, that's so cool. Yeah. I'm curious. I want to ask you, Gary, share with us. How do you get executives to sort of get out of that super serious kind of play isn't serious, we can't do that mode?
You bring up a really good point. And for me personally, sometimes you have to trick them. I'm 100% sure, because once they get that permission to play and they start getting in that zone, then it's all good. But in the meantime, it's more about, well, you know what we're doing, we're working on some communication strategies. We're going to do a quick activity that's an immersive experience. And boom, boom, boom. Here are the agreements, and then we start doing it, and I'm like, fooled you, we're playing.
We're playing. You did improv. I like looking at their faces when they realize they just did improv and play, and they're like, oh, what? And they survived, and it wasn't awful. And I think too, it's interesting. I think part of it too is for a lot of people, it's triggers. Play triggers, but it's low risk. And this is why psychological safety is so important. If you go, hey, there's no right or wrong. And you know what? If you find yourself judging somebody, right? We all have to step in and say, hey, there's no judgment, no meanness, but like, hey, there's no judgment here. There's no right or wrong. And you have to really adhere to the rules. I think it's triggering because I've talked to so many people, I'm sure you have too, Gary, and I'm sure probably people listening right now. You can remember a time where the stakes were low, it shouldn't have mattered, but somebody made you feel that you were wrong. Mm-hmm. And it triggers for people. Play, being picked last on a team, being told you're no good at football by a coach, being told, I can do musical comedy now, but when I first started in in comedy and improv, I was told I couldn't sing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And it's just not true, but I had to find a coach that would, work with me. And the coach was like, I don't know what that person was talking about. That's their baggage. So I think every human being has had like that baggage projected onto them. And so play brings up a lot of issues for people, which is why the most psychologically safe you can be and exposed and vulnerable is during playtime.
Yep. And you bring up a really good point about these triggers. Brene Brown talks a lot about that too. I forgot which one of her books, but she was saying art and creativity. And we can all think about a time when we were younger. Yeah. And we had one of those moments where we did something and then we looked at the other person, or maybe a teacher mentioned like, oh, that's not a horse. And then in that moment, you told yourself, oh, well, that's right, I'm wrong. And then you just immediately say, well, I guess I can't draw, or I'm not an artist, or I'm not creative. Yeah. And it stuck with you. And then, years later, there's a situation that reminds you of that. And then you have that sort of visceral reaction, that trigger. And it's unfortunate that happens. But the good thing is that we've learned in the last couple of decades that you can teach an old dog new tricks, and you can reverse those effects of art shame or whatever play shaming that happened a long time ago. And you can create new experiences. And this goes back to the whole point about psychological safety. You have to have an environment where you can feel safe to just put yourself out there, knowing that it's not going to be perfect, knowing that there's going to be lots of mistakes. Yeah. And for me, I know growing up, like for the longest time, I told people, well, I can't draw. And I remember being in art class, and there was, his name is Mark. I remember him. He was amazing artist. It was 6th grade, and it was an effortless experience for him. But again, that was like one of the first times that I saw someone that's a peer of mine have an ability. And I didn't know anything about innate abilities or anything like that. I just knew that his was really good and mine was just like ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And so in that moment, I told myself that I'm not good at this. And that was the story that kept playing in my head, that I couldn't draw, until years later, I realized like, oh, it's not that I couldn't draw. It's just that, what if, I don't know his backstory. He could have been practicing that for like years.
Yeah. Cut yourself a break. Exactly. A break. And I think, if I may be so bold, and Gary's known me a long time, so I think he'll let me be so bold.
Yes.
Screw those people who tell you can't do something, who try to kill your dream, or tell you you're not creative, or tell you can't, whatever, because that's what they're doing, is they're sabotaging, and they are making you feel psychologically unsafe. And you may at some level have absorbed it, and then might be projecting that inadvertently onto other people. Mm-hmm. Again, this is not about shame or blame. So one of the things that you can do immediately, if you manage a team, during all your meetings, all your reviews with people, lay out what is okay for them to experiment with, and make it safe in any meeting to disagree as long as it's respectful. Set those ground rules. Make sure people know. And if you don't run a team and you don't run a company, you still have a voice, and you can show up and decide to be that kind of person for somebody else, be psychologically safe and respectful to other people. You can also say, and this works, I've seen it. If you're in a meeting and somebody is doing that, it takes a little bit of bravery, but most people will back you up. You can say, okay, when we start to blame, start to judge the idea, it doesn't make people feel like contributing. And I'd rather not see that happen. Let's not shut down the best of what everybody here can contribute. So I know you don't mean to, but let's refrain, let's pull back from judging. And if you just make that without shaming or blaming that comment, people tend to go, oh yeah, it can help pull, but recruit people to help you. And it really does. There's all layers are responsible, from the CEO to the team leads to you are empowered.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
And to the point that you made about empowering people to realize that they can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
We can all agree that emotions are contagious, and typically the negative emotions trump the positive ones, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are finding that is a common thread in meetings or in situations, I like to invite you to have a little bit of courage and bravery and try to be someone who sets the standard with the positivity first, because that would lead the way for more positive actions. And you don't have to be sort of Pollyanna about everything. You can just go in, and this is one thing that I love to do, especially when I know that I have a negative Nancy in a group.
Mm-hmm.
And again,
Nancy, you know who you is.
Yes, exactly. And I don't call that person out, but what I do is knowing that they maybe have a tendency to be more critical about everything, and it just brings the whole vibe of the room down. I make it a point to start out every meeting or every interaction with something positive. And it could be something as simple as, what is something that is going right in your week or in your day? What is something good that you've done, that you're something that you're excited about? Just starting getting people to think about that.
Yeah.
And starting to have positive body language and express that. You will be surprised at how that starts to have an effect, a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that a lot. And you bring up a really important point. You don't want to be Pollyanna about it. You don't want to be like, all right, everybody, we're going to smile today. Sure, I know some of y'all are getting pink slips later, but I want you to put on your happy face and march your buns in there, and you're going to smile, damn it. Just smile. I'm not, I guess like we've all had those moments in companies. Yes. It's like, are you kidding me? Is this the TPS report moment? No, hell no. It's not that at all. I think it's really your point. It's like, okay, look, there's a place for the ideas, and if you could just say, especially in a meeting situation, look, there's going to be a time where we're going to talk about our concerns, but it's not personally directed. It's not about Bob or Nancy, you did this or you did that. No, it's get the ideas out. And if you're doing like brainstorming, for example, then you separate it and later to have a vetting process, and you can express my concern on that idea, like remove the person from the idea. And it's not about beating up the idea. That's stupid, whatever. Get to the heart of the concern, right? You just need somebody to help moderate that. But it's bigger than that. You and I both know you've got to have a culture where people can express their concerns to each other, and not this BS fake smile, but there's got to be that respect there. And that takes somebody, when they see that happening, a team lead or somebody else, to say, this is not conducive, time out, this is not helpful. And I when I was running teams back in tech, when I would see that happen, I would step in and I would just shut that shit down. I'd be like, this is not conducive, it's not healthy. We're not doing this. We're not doing this.
We're not going there.
We're not going there. And then everybody take a 5-minute break. We'll come back. Let's talk about the idea. And it actually worked. You just have to make sure that people know the rules and stick to the rules. And people feel gratitude actually about it, because the people who hate to contribute all of a sudden feel like, oh, I can say that without being judged. So you've got to be a champion for the people who are afraid to speak up. And if you see somebody constantly talking, then that's your point to say, all right, Nancy, we've heard enough. Okay, enough about your kids and those photos. And we haven't heard from, Gary or Bob. Let's let the people who are the more quiet people speak up so that they can feel included. You can be a traffic cop. There's nothing wrong with looking out for your more quiet, introverted people who have a lot to offer, but they may feel steamrolled by the people that are like, blah, 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 blah. And that's how they do it exactly in meetings. Blah, blah, blah,
yes.
blah, 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 blah. So there's nothing wrong with helping out your fellow person in your group who just, the quiet people, if they're quiet, probably have a lot to say. They're just not able to get into the conversation.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yes. And speaking of frameworks, since both of us come from this world, I personally feel the world of improvisation and, the training that we've had, that is a perfect sort of framework, for companies. And if you start to apply the principles of improvisation, you will, one of the byproducts is you will create that sense of psychological safety. So Kathy, would you mind like sort of talking about like some of the ways that you see improv and, contributing to that psychological safety?
Yeah, of course. And Gary so well, and some of the folks that are going to watch this now and later will probably know. If I think improv really helps people understand that. I think the biggest fear is if I say yes and to an idea, I'm going to have to do the idea, and so people get afraid. If we can start to train people around yes and what it really means, about how yes and just means I hear you, and while we're brainstorming, I'm going to entertain something. But that's not just about brainstorming. If we can train people to have a yes and kind of attitude to the work that they do, I think we can train people to think in ways to make it work. How do I see possibility? Because our tendency is to go to kill the idea first, or kill the baby. We want to kill the baby versus just go in there. So I think that helps a lot. And there's other improv games, as Gary knows. There's things you can do, but I think it starts with really getting people to understand what yes and really is about.
Yep. You bring up a good point. And our friend Mike Ganino, talked about this in a video recently. And if I can find it, I'll share it in the comments. I really liked his approach to yes and. Yes and means accept the reality. Yeah. You don't always have to like what the person said, but accept the reality, acknowledge them, and build.
Yes.
And Kathy, you had talked about people earlier, that people just want to be heard. And you'll be surprised at the response you will get from people when they know that they have been heard.
So it's so disarming, isn't it? Because we're not used to being heard. It's interesting. Because we yes, but more than we are aware. And the minute we change to yes and, people are like, "What did you just say yes and to me? Did you just what? What do you want from me?" And it's interesting, the dynamic, because people are just taken aback. And getting back to what Mike said, a friend of both Gary and myself, yes, that's exactly it. If we can just remember that yes and doesn't have to be threatening. I think we're threatened by yes and. Again, it doesn't mean their idea is better, your idea sucks. It doesn't mean we're going to build their idea. That's not it all what it is. It's, okay, yes and, I accept that you feel this way. I accept that this is your reality. And here's how I feel. And let's see if we can move forward given where our realities are. And I can add on to what you've just said. And all it is saying, I hear what you're saying. Doesn't mean you have to build the idea. And I think when you reframe it that way, it's a way to make sure everybody gets heard. You still may not move forward on their idea, but at least you've heard it out versus being so quick to judge. But when you yes and too, it comes back to you. If you practice yes and with other people, they will start to model and yes and you. Yeah.
And another principle that I really like that I've learned from improv is make your partner look amazing. And that is something, when we're on stage and we're making things up, we're all out there like on a tightrope without a net. If you're focusing on yourself, you stop listening and you get in this tunnel vision. But if your objective is how can I make my scene partner look amazing? It, one, takes you out of your own head. It makes you more empathetic. And two, you get in this creation mode. And, imagine if, you took that concept and applied it in a business context. You work to make your coworkers look amazing or your clients look amazing. And that was your objective. Imagine how things would potentially be different.
Hugely. I mean, completely. Imagine if you did that. And I think this is where reinforcement, because it's such a different concept and people aren't used to thinking this way. And this is where you can reinforce that idea with reward structures, incentive structures. Imagine if we did reward people for teams that made each other look good, and team goals versus the your goal, my goal. And I understand some of that is individual, and I get that. If we change that framework, I think we would also incentivize people to be more we focused. But Gary, you bring up something really interesting, and I would challenge people to, if this is something that you're not used to doing, here's your homework, and it's fun. Try yes-anding people, and really sincerely yes-anding. Not the I did an engineering with an engineering team last year. I tell this example because it's hilarious. And I was working with a bunch of engineers, and the guy goes, yes, and that idea sucks.
I know.
And I was like, that's not how yes, and works. He goes, but I said yes, and Kathy. Didn't I say yes, and? Didn't I? And I was like, okay, you violated every spirit. It's the spirit of yes, and. It was pretty hilarious. So if you do try this with your teams. And even if you don't agree with an idea, again, you don't have to build it. Try saying, yes, and I hear you. Yes, and we could also add, and then try to add on to move the idea forward. I think what you'll find is the resistance that somebody has when they don't feel heard, that wall just comes down. Just comes down. I think it'll change your relationships too. I really do.
Yeah, agreed. I know personally, there was someone, I was working for a company, and there was someone that tended to be more cynical than others. And because of that, I honestly just started seeing them as that. And I stopped actually hearing them. And then, I started doing improv, and I started learning about these concepts. And I, gave myself a challenge of like, you know what, let me listen more, and let me just yes and see what happened. And you would be, it was like magic. That person, you're exactly right, Kathy. They were disarmed, completely disarmed. And we created this relationship that I don't think would have happened had I personally not stepped up first and, and put myself out there and did some yes and worked on how can I make this person look amazing.
Yeah, I love that story. I love that you did that. And I've had a similar experience where they just all of a sudden they're like, what's happening here? You're agreeing with me. And just it changes the tension. And all of a sudden they realize you're not the enemy. You're trying to move this forward. And it really can change the interpersonal dynamic. It really can. And I really, really mean that sincerely. If you come across sincere, not like a yes and bot, but you can really make that work. And I think the other thing that I love doing that people might find useful is so just even at this conference. So I did this thing on this workshop, and then right after the workshop, I heard people yes butting each other. But it was funny because then people in the workshop were like, yes, and they were, yes, and so when you can recruit other people will model it. People will model it. So this woman kept saying, I hear you, yes, but, and during the course of the workshop, I modeled it for the class, and I just kept saying, yes, and she kept saying, yes, but, and I kept saying, yes, and the class was laughing because they got it. She wasn't. And finally she went, oh, I've been saying yes, but this whole time. I didn't have to tell her. She heard me model, keep coming back with her to yes, and all of a sudden she went, oh, and I didn't have to tell her she was yes butting. So I think if you find somebody yes butting you, stick to your guns on yes, and model it for them. People will figure it out. They really will.
And you bring up a really good point. One, and it goes back to the whole thing about play. And when you play, you do things in a low stakes scenario. And sometimes that allows you to have new vocabulary that disarms people. And then it becomes less personal and less about the rules of the game, because the rules of the game was you have to say yes and again, those rules sometimes supersedes everything else. And that reminds me of a game, and this is a really good game. It's Color Advanced Emotion, and the game is very simple. Someone is telling a story. It's a two-person game. One person is telling the story. The other person, I like to say, they're the storytelling coach, and they have three options. They could, while they're listening to the story, they need to be very curious. And if they want to hear more detail about what is going on, the surroundings, they, say color. And when they say color, the person who's telling the story must in that moment start to pepper in more details. And then when they're, heard enough, they would say advance, and, they'll continue with the story. Or maybe they want to know, what was the emotion like? How did it feel? What were the vibe of whatever was going on? Then they can say emotion. And then, someone can go into detail. And then when they've heard enough, they say advance. Or maybe the person is sort of rambling, and they, you need them to just say, all right, I've heard enough. You can say advance. So you have these three controls, and it's a great way if you want to help people get more clear on their stories. It's a great way to coach them. But the cool thing about this, I was running this with this big organization, and it was awesome. And we were doing the debriefing. We're talking about, like, what did we learn? How did it feel like to be heard? And, and have someone coach you on a story that you probably told the same way over and over again. And there was some really great stuff, like people, said that, well, I didn't realize I had much more detail in my head than I thought. But this is where the magical thing happened. They said, you know what? When we're in a meeting, and someone is talking too long and we need them to move it on, let's just say advance. And it became something that had no emotion tied to it, a new nomenclature, new vocabulary that took all the emotion out of it, and they kept playing that game in meetings. And it was a great way for someone to say, essentially, wrap it up without the emotions tied to it.
I love that. I so love that. That's such a great example too, because you never want to personalize it. It's like, can we wrap this up? Move it along here. Lunch is coming up. Yeah, I love that. I also love that, and it's so true. I think we have more stories in us than we give ourselves credit for. And I think when you force people to maybe give the emotion or the color, they are forced to then dive deeper to that next layer. And I think that's a great exploratory, game. And again, low stakes. There's no way to get it wrong. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's just a great way to really practice something in just, in an environment where you make your partner look good. You help each other out. Yeah. I love that. That's a great game. It's an oldie and a goodie. I like it.
I love it. And it's just another example of, now you have a new tool that, when you take this game that we played in a low stakes environment, now you're starting to apply it to work, and we're working together, because it goes back to what Kathy mentioned earlier. Sometimes we have these triggers, and what happens in the real life moment, we're not really responding to what is really happening. We're responding to what happened a long time ago. And maybe you were in a meeting and someone told you to wrap it up, and it embarrassed you, and you had this trigger. And now anytime you're in a meeting, someone says, wrap it up, it reminds you of that one time, and then you get embarrassed and maybe you sort of lash out. But like creating new rules and new vocabulary, there's no emotion tied to advance.
Yeah. I love
or color or anything like that. And so now you're playing in your meetings, and you're co-creating this experience together. And everyone gets what they need.
Absolutely. And I love that, because anybody can call advance, anybody can call color. Everybody, does it equally, and it's not focused on one person. It's just the way that you manage the meeting, and everybody agrees to it. It's not personal. I like that a lot. No, I think that's really, really important. It's really amazing how, and we appreciate this because we see this a lot. But it's so easy to forget that play, what should be fun, can be fraught with stress for a lot of people because of those past issues. And, which is why people are so hung up when you give rules. Did I do it right? The first thing people go, did I get it right?
Yeah.
Because they go back to school. And some of that, your job is not to coach them through trauma. That's not the issue. You can't be responsible for people's triggers. However, by lowering the risk and just saying, look, there's no right or wrong here. There's no right or wrong. There's no shaming. If you screw up, you screw up. And in improv, we just go, ta-da, we laugh.
We celebrate it.
We celebrate it. It takes the sting out of, I'm going to look foolish because for a lot of people, it really, they do feel, that sense of judgment, even when it's supposed to be playful for them. It's supposed to be fun. It comes with a checklist of like, I gotta do it right. That's something we gotta fix.
Agreed. And we're looking at the comments. Damien said, yes, mistakes are part of the learning process. And I like to invite all of us just to go back in time, and for some it's longer than others, but think about when you were more of a kid, everything was learning and everything was play. And
Yeah.
I'm getting reminded of that every day. I have a 2-year-old, and Kathy, you have a 9-year-old?
He's 10.
10. Man, time is going by. Yes. Yes. And up until a certain point, everything is learned through play, is learned through some sort of playful spirit, playful actions. That's how you learn. And I know, and I tell this story all the time when I do workshops, and I talk about when my son was learning how to walk. Me and my wife, we were more concerned about him learning how to walk than others. He was 1, and everyone's like, has he walked yet? And we're like, I don't know. Has he walked?
Gotta hit the milestone.
Right? We got to hit those milestones, and like, we got to get it right. And he would get up and he would try, he would stumble. And I joked around saying, like, imagine if he can walk and he was more like us adults, and he would sit me down and he like, Dad, I've been trying this walking thing, but it's just not for me. I'm just, I just don't get it. So I'm just going to stick with this army crawl thing that I'm doing. Just, but he didn't do it. Like, for him, the mistakes were part of the process. Matter of fact, he welcomed the mistakes. So, like, I was the one who was like, don't fall. But he was like taking these bold risks and taking 2 steps, and he got it. But as us adults, because we get to a point where we're not learning as much as we were, then we forget what it's like to be in that learning state. And we don't want to make mistakes because, that may be seen as you're not good enough or whatever thing, baggage that you have in your little backpack of trauma.
Yeah. I think that's where play without attaching outcomes to it is really helpful. So if you want to encourage more play, it's really hard when you go, all right, everybody, I got pizza and I got soda and I'm all lock you in here till you reinvent something. Damn. And then it's like, you lock the door. It's like, that's like scary play, scary mommy play, scary daddy play.
Yes.
And I think we do that a lot in companies. And I think the way that you get people to be playful is you have to encourage them to like not attach outcomes, because there are times in innovation we're talking about where you're going to try something and it is not going to work. And if people are fearful of the outcomes, they're not going to do it again. So I think there has to be a sense of, look, all right, you've got time. We're going to try a bunch of stuff. Maybe at the end of the month, let's come back and report back. We each tried a new thing to see if it worked. And let's report back and then do a debrief and figure out what worked. Did anything work? And then learn from it. And so rather than get all hung up on ROIs and, blah, 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 like, let's just have open, kind of unstructured, go experiment. Here's the parameters. And then come back and let's talk about the learning. Let's be hung up on the learning and not on like the rules of the outcomes of the play. Maybe the outcomes are everything didn't work. And yet it's so instructive to learn what didn't work, because now you eliminated a whole bunch of stuff not to do again. And I think that's the thing about play. It's gotta come with like a supportive environment to like just go do it and not be like, it's gonna be on your like permanent record. It's gonna be on the permanent record. I'd be so screwed if there was the digital record back when I was in high school. I would be screwed. But we gotta have that sense of just openness about it, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. So we're getting on time here pretty, we're almost done, but I see that there are about 7 people that are watching. So for those 7 people, hello. And I am curious on if there is any questions, was this insightful? Feel free to leave a comment or not, is up to you. And, while we're waiting, because I know there is a little lag, Kathy, any last words or maybe challenges or things that we want to invite people to do so that they can go forth and play and create safe environments?
Yes, I want you to always remember, and I know Gary is my co-conspirator in fun here, just give yourself that permission slip and do hold yourself to account. What are you responsible for? You're not responsible for everybody else's problems. You are not. I don't care what your mother says to you. I don't care what your therapist says to you. You're not. So just remember, how do I want to show up and support other people? If I want people to support me, I've got to show up and be that person for somebody else. And number 2, how can you create an environment of play by how you show up and encourage other people? How can you make your partner look good? Yes, and. The homework really is go out and yes and somebody who's yes budding you. It's challenging. It's challenging. But I really do believe if you can do this successfully for like 2 weeks, you can reform a habit. You will completely create a new neural pathway of thinking. It takes 2 weeks. So be consistent about it. Get a little rubber band, and just every time you say yes, but, snap that band. Snap that band. Boom, 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 boom. This is the cheapest Fitbit, y'all, you're going to get. It's going to be like, ow, ow, ow. But I promise you, within a couple of weeks, it will train your brain, and you will be amazed at the results and how, when you say yes and to somebody, how their facial expression changes, how their energy changes. I promise you. So please go out and try it. Go out and try it.
Woohoo. Yes. Kathy said it all. This has been another amazing LinkedIn Live, whether you're joining live or catching the replay. This is chock full of useful things for you to think about and do to create that environment where people can have this feeling of belonging, because that's what we need to create innovation, for people to be creative, to be more confident, and more importantly, have more joy and be themselves. So, yes.
You deserve that. Everybody out there deserves it. So give yourself that gift.
Yes.
Right?
Well, thank you, Kathy, for being on the show. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Gary, and thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
And so we will talk to you later. If you have any other comments or anything, put them in. We will be checking it. And yes, thank Kathy. Kathy is amazing. Kathy, we're if they're not connected with you yet on LinkedIn, in addition to your LinkedIn profile, where can they get in touch with you? How can they stay in touch?
Sure. You can go to keepithuman.com is my website. You can also reach out to me on the Twitters, on the Facebooks, on the socials. I'm on all the socials.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Can I just tell you how wonderful Gary is? You already know that if you're watching this, but Gary is the best. And we go back a few years, and I adore him. So thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for everyone who's watching. And this has been another LinkedIn Live. So bye.